masilela siyadinga ulahlekelwa ubuhlungu kodwa impilo tethu asikadiphatheli siphathelwe umniyowa ongesikhathi sabo nesikhathi sabo Grace ushile angel akasekho Granny wasishiya
Raise it slightly high, one level more up. That's it. But before we start, okay, now we'll be singing Bonita. I will walk in and you'll just follow me. Even if it's Lahleka, you will just keep following the tape. So the tradition, Lagamakoko, this was the only door that was used. You may have seen a door at the back, which is the front. It was never used. It was used for what we call a stranger. That is visitors who visit very rarely. And those are the people whom abafikile kukhishwa cutlery entsha, crockery entsha, you know? And when they are gone, it gets locked up again. I'll show you la vekielo. So we will start in the kitchen and then move from there.
It's safe.
Almost everything happened in this kitchen. We would sit here as a lounge. It would be our eating area. It would be our praying area. It would even be our sleeping area. So the kitchen was used for everything.
Yeah.
And why it ended up being used as a sleeping area is because there was a time in our history where at any point in time you could find 30 or 40 people staying in the house, fed by the salary of a bricklayer. Our mother was always a housewife as long as I know. And in fact, those people who studied European economic history will understand the value of having a mother in the house all the time. In Europe, actually, there is a grant in the social security system. If you're a professional woman who then bears a child, you're actually paid almost full salary for the first 6 years of the child, because they know the value of grounding a child at that stage. Now, because Mama never left the house, you would leave the house actually like a stulolis. When you come back, you'll know uzobala. So there was this inherent discipline. You couldn't come out of school and go and play. Because Uma figure late, she'll be sitting here watching you. So I had a rule with my friends. If it's for your dala, we all come here. Whether we're 10 or 20, we'll all come here, stand at the door. Mama's telling you that. Okay, go. Then I can go and play. So the reason why we would end up with 40 people here, in 1976, we experienced one of the historical events in South Africa, where children started the liberation of the black man. June 16, 1976. When children were being slaughtered and had to leave the country, it turns out they were given the same message by their parents. Mntwana, hambu yeswazi, you will find the Masilelas, they will know what to do. We ended up with tens of children arriving here, with all having the same message. Umama, ugogo, ubaba, usisi, umzala, umalum said we should come here. And then we're trying to work out why is the message the same and why do they come here? Because there's a lot of South African families, some more prominent than the Masilela family, but they never went there. Instead they came here. So we started working backwards to establish what happened. Now, Obaba went to the Second World War. When he came back in 1945, as part of the demobilization program, he asked to be trained. Now, he had options. You could have chosen a bicycle, you could have chosen a jazi, you could have chosen a kitchen scheme or a wardrobe, or you could have chosen education. He chose education. After his training, the first project was those who come from South Africa. You know Hammanskraal, timber location in Hammanskraal. He built timber location. When the contract ended, he needed to get a job. He then went into Soweto to try and get a job. Couldn't find a job, so he decided to set up his own construction business. So most of the houses that you see in Soweto standing were built by him. So everybody in Soweto knew Uptongo Masilela. Then around that same time, in the 40s, 50s, the Swaziland royalty started its negotiation with the British Crown for their independence. But they found it important that they cannot negotiate on their own. So they would consult the ANC. They would send delegations to Alexandra and Soweto to consult with the ANC on how to manage the negotiation. Whilst they were there, amongst the delegation, there was Maboya Masilela from Nkambe, Kandwand. And people said, hey man, there's another Masilela here in Soweto. You should know him. So they were introduced, and the old man got to learn about the difference in education system between South Africa and Swaziland. He was also told, you'll get free land. Just come, he'll give you a piece of land. So that was an excitement for him. But it never happened until 1965. When he left in 1965, if you date back, you will see that it coincided with the Rivonia trial that took Nelson Mandela into Robben Island. It then turns out that when he left around that time, in the minds of the average Sowetan, Masilela is going to Swaziland. Masilela must be a politician. Masilela must be going to set up shop for the ANC.
Oh, wow.
That was their conclusion. Yet they just left for a better education. When Bantu education was enacted in 1956, 57, I can't remember now. That's when he made the decision he's going to migrate to Swaziland. But that never happened until 1965.
Sure.
And this is why then, 11 years later, when South African children are sent out of the country, with that mentality of who Masilela is, they then gave them this message. So this became the main reception point in the kingdom to receive South African exiles. They would come here, go deeper into exile. Those who went to training would come back the same route They would arrive here and proceed back into South Africa to launch their operations. So over 80% of the operations of the ANC were planned, launched, and celebrated in this house. It operated above ground. When King Sobhuza passed on in 1984, 82, yes. August 82. When King Sobhuza passed on in 82, a new structure was set up to run the kingdom because the current king was not of age. They set up what they call the Koko. The Koko is, what is Koko in English?
The inner council.
No, it's
It's a frog.
It's a frog. They set up El Koko,
It is
which
my
is
dear.
frog in English. El Koko just could not accept the concept of the ANC being in the kingdom. They banned it immediately and they sent everybody out of the country. The only remaining entity that would manage the activities of the ANC was this house. We were very concerned that this house is known by everybody. It operates above ground. And at that time, Eugene de Kock and his team was going around the region, kidnapping people, bombing houses, and all sorts of things. We always thought we're next, but it never happened. Around mid-80s, the ANC recorded the biggest defection in its history. And that was the defection of a certain Glory September. In history, in newspapers, he was referred to as Mr. X. Mr. X operated from here. The night before he was kidnapped, we're sitting around this table talking about the future of South Africa. To me, Glory September was a potential president of a new South Africa. When he stepped out of this door and out of the gate, it was around 3-4 a.m. That was the last time we saw Glory September. He disappeared, was captured by Eugene de Kock, taken to Vlakplaas, the place that was bought precisely for this process. They tortured him, converted him into an Askari. He came back in Swaziland, wreaked havoc. People were just disappearing and dying like flies. People were tracked from here, Babalandele, to various places and get assassinated wherever they were. And that really concerned us. Around for about 2 years to 3, this house was under military surveillance, 24 hours a day. But this too was a time where the ANC was no longer legal in Swaziland. And that meant we did not have manpower to man the house in the manner in which it was supposed to man. So we'd have deep sentries changing shifts. I took the 5 o'clock shift until 12 midnight. Then I would sleep to prepare to go to school the following day. So it was a very difficult period. But for some interesting reason, not a member of the family was kidnapped, and the house was never attacked. We never knew why. Until we were writing the book. Right at the end of the manuscript, I get an opportunity to meet a police officer that worked with Eugene de Kock, who stood me up at least 4 times, agrees to a meeting and doesn't show up. And that concerned me as well, because when I told the family that I have an opportunity to meet this guy, they said, don't meet him. You don't know what he's going to do to you. But I just had this edge to understand what happened. So we finally met in Centurion. So I asked him, I had only one question for him, but I had a precursor to that. I asked him if he could remember the houses that they watched over in Swaziland. And he said, no, there's no way I can remember. We watched over many houses. And I said, if I can show you a picture, will you recognize the house? He says, yes. So I had the manuscript facing down in front of me. I just turned it around and put it in front of him and said, do you recognize this house? He said, of course. This was a very important house to us. Most important in Swaziland. And I said, so why didn't you attack it? And he says, there's no way we want to attack it. Because our principle at the time was never to attack a house that housed people that work with them or worked for them. For me, that was the end of the interview. Everybody else, when I tell them this story, they say, hey, Elias, you should have continued. You should have asked who those people were. Now, there is something about information. Not all information is good for you. Now, I thought to myself, if I ask that question, and he says, one of the spies is your mother, how would I respond to it? Or any of my siblings. So I decided just to leave it. That was the end of the interview and I left. But for me, it was very important to have that piece of the history in the book. So this is how this house was preserved. Now if you read many liberation histories across the world, there's always this object that is common to all sides of the war. And being common to all sides of the war, they'll all protect it. During the war in Mozambique, there used to be a bus, a red bus, red like that bag. This flower. It was called Shibomba. Shibomba would transport people from Babane, pick them up in Manzini, a mini cafe, cross the border into
Maputo.
Lorenzo Marx, before it was Maputo. It was impossible to drive that route after the border into Mozambique. Many people never reached their destinations. But that bus would drive day and night without a problem. Shibomba. And if you read other liberation histories, you'll find this common character that binds them. And we concluded that the common character here is that for the South African police, it gave them information and access to the people they wanted. For the Swazi police, incidentally, some of them were working with the regime. So they wanted to preserve this place so that they can continue getting their check. Not only that, the ANC would always drop money here for operations, and the guys will come and pick it up and go and do their operations. And they had timed when the money gets dropped. And as soon as the money is dropped, we knew there was going to be a raid. As soon as they get hold of that envelope, the raid is over, they go, they don't even explain why they were raiding. If they don't get that brown envelope, everybody, including the tenants here, would be frog marched to the Manzini police station. So we just saw that pattern. And the biggest raid that we have ever experienced is a raid that was looking for the mastermind behind the Pretoria Church Street bomb blast. So the Pretoria Church Street bomb blast was a very complicated operation, in that it was the only operation which resulted with it affecting soft targets. Now, in the ANC, there was a fundamental principle. There was what we called hard targets on the one side and soft targets on the other. Hard targets are installations of the apartheid regime, their personnel, and their families. So if you hit any of these, you have done the right thing. Then there are soft targets, which are your normal citizens. Now, this operation was designed such that it was going to plant a bomb right in the middle of Pretoria and get that bomb triggered at around lunchtime. And of course, it was in front of a military headquarters, but at lunchtime, it's not only the military that's going to be on the pavement.
Right.
So a lot of people perished as a result of that bomb blast. ANC came this close to be declared a terrorist movement by the United Nations. Their only saving grace or defense was that no, this was a special operation. Now there were 3 different types of operation. One was an operation that was planned and authorized by head office in Lusaka. 2, there was an operation that is impromptu. You're driving to an operation or you're driving innocently as an operative and all of a sudden you're accosted by Amabun or whatever and you have to defend yourself. That operation was accepted. Then there's this special ops or special operation. Never authorized in Lusaka. The guys would decide overnight what special operation they want to do and they would implement, and Lusaka will only hear it in the news. So their defense was this was a special operation. It was not authorized by us. That's how we escaped the classification. So all these things would happen in this kitchen. All this thinking, all the experiences. There was a small transistor radio that would sit here at the back here. When an operation goes, we will sit on the radio, either on radio 702 or radio 5. Those were the radio stations that actually picked up these immediately. Once the operation happens, it's going to be announced on radio, and then we now have to be on the alert, because every time there's an operation, it's followed by a retaliation. So those kinds of things always happen. And fortunately, this house was never hit. Even one of the big operations, Sasol, even though it came from here, the retaliation didn't come to Swaziland. The retaliation went to Mozambique. When you hear about Matola raid was a retaliation. So that's where we are. When this place is full, we will then have some people migrating to the dining room. You can follow me to the dining room. The dining room was typically for strangers. Personally, I don't remember sitting on this table in Sakula to eat. It was only for those strangers. And the capital semva kwakho mamfundisi. Yabona, if you see this cabinet, this is where they lock up the special cutlery and crockery. And when this is full, we will then migrate to the sitting room, the lounge. We can come to the lounge. Okay, so this would then be where the strategic decisions would take place. Most of the senior commanders would hardly sit in the kitchen. They would come and sit here and formulate their tactics and go away. Now, part of the importance of the lounge is Christmas. Christmas has always been a big thing in the Masilela household. The rule is, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. On Christmas Day, you have to be home. On Boxing Day, you can go and do whatever you want. But Christmas Day, you have to be home. So all the operatives knew that when they wanted home-cooked food, they would come here on Christmas Day. And it would be buzzing, lots of people inside and outside. In 1993, the Christmas before South Africa's independence in 1994. We were sitting here, and I remember I was sitting and I could see somebody coming in from that side. This was quite late at night, around 9-ish. And as we're sitting here, we hear a voice that is familiar. And somebody says, "Akusu September." And we all agreed, it sounds like him. But at that stage, nobody expected to see September. He had left the ANC 85, 86. This is 1993. What would he be doing here? And then he gets to the kitchen, he finds umakoko nomkhulu, he asks where the guys are. And they say, "No, it's a sitting room." As soon as he showed face there, the only thing I heard was the cocking of guns. Everybody here cocked their gun. Our eldest brother, Utod, bekahleli lapha, la uhleli khona. I had to stand up, he had to stand up to go and block off with us for September before he is shot. And he said, "September, please get out of here. As you can see, you're not wanted." And he realized, he didn't really resist, he didn't ask. He turned around into the night. That's the last time we heard of September. He was assassinated, I think, January of 1994, just before the elections. And the interpretation is that his handlers didn't want him to continue talking. They'd already spoken enough during the Nofomela trials and the like, and they didn't want more. And that's what actually caused a very rapid change in South Africa. So much as we're saying September was a sellout, his crossing the floor accelerated a lot of things. When you read the book, if you've read the book, how many have read the book? We need to correct this. If you've read the book, and when you get to read the book, you will see how I write about September. I glorify him as my hero. The only sin for me was his defection. Everything else about him was that he's one of the most intelligent of liberation fighters, and he qualified to be the president of South Africa. When I interviewed some of the commanders, Jabu, whom you're going to listen to tomorrow night, General Shoke, another general who's Piwe Nyanda Kepuza, said to me, "Elias, we don't know whom you're writing about. To us, this guy was a sellout from day one when he joined the ANC." And asked all of them the same question. If he was a sellout, why was he allowed to rise in the ranks? By the time he crossed the floor, he could have been about number 2, number 3, I don't think number 4, from the position of O.R. Tambo, the president of the ANC at the time. And I said, I cannot reconcile the two. Nobody could tell me why he was allowed to rise in the ranks. When we launched the book in 2007, Obab Zuma, former President Jacob Zuma, came to launch the book on behalf of the ANC. He made the same statement when he presented his speech. He said, "Elias, you and I need tea, because I agree with everything that you say in the book. The only thing that I do not agree with, and you need to explain it to me, is this thing about Glory September." But he never said in public he was a sellout, but he insinuated in the way in which he said it. And he said, "We don't know the September you're talking about." So I'm still waiting for that tea. We haven't had that tea. But Glory September tried to come back to the ANC. Everybody refused to talk to him. Everybody refused to give him audience. Only one commander or commissar from Limpopo, not Limpopo, from Venda, gave him the audience. And the audience that he gave him was to ask him one question. And the question he wanted to ask him was, why did you talk? And this guy said, no man, they were going to kill me, these people. And his response was, but younger people than you, whom you trained, kept quiet until they died. So what's different with you? And then he used a very interesting defense, which then required us to get approval from the ANC to publish the book as it stands today. And he said, I applied guerrilla tactics 101. But in applying that principle, I discovered that my own leaders omitted that principle. And that principle is, if one in operation, the three of us, and one of us gets arrested, we stop the operation, or we change it completely. 6 months later, when he came back to Swaziland, every single DLB that he pointed out, on the day in which the arms were supposed to either be planted or collected from the DLB. DLB is where you hide arms. Right. Nothing had changed. The same people were there on the day and at the time. And this is why they were able to kill people that easily. And he argues, it was not my error. It was the error of the leadership of the ANC. So this to me was the biggest indictment in the history of the ANC. There may be a lot of indictments today about bad governance and bad management, but that one, to me, was the biggest. So we then took the manuscript to the ANC, top 6 of the ANC, to read and comment, and we asked them, please focus on this part and tell us if you are happy with it. They came back to us 2 weeks later and they said, you know, Elias, we cannot change history. If this is what happened, so be it, publish as it is. So when you get to read, look at that part and tell me what you think about it. When we launched the book in 2007, for the first time in the history of Eswatini, it was not yet Eswatini then, but first time in the history of Eswatini that you had opposition parties in the kingdom under the same roof with police, under the same roof with the ANC, under the same roof with the Masilelas, and under the same roof with people who were just against apartheid. One of the biggest fears that Tumakoko had when we thought about the idea of writing the book, because she was the most tortured. She was always at home. They would find her and they would say, where are these terrorists? And she would never say, I don't know them. She would say, Abantu abamla. And I will not stop keeping them in the house. And they would pulverize her for that. So that one of the reasons she died early was because of all the tortures that she went through the Swazi police. But on that day, I remember her coming to me and saying, Elias, is this real? Is this really happening? And I said, Makoko, it is real. Things have changed. There was an article, I think it was, I'm not going to mention the name because there are reporters here, one of the newspapers in the country, which has the title that said, Nyawasaba, which means I fear them. That was when Umakoko gave an interview about what she thinks about the upcoming launch of the book. She never wanted the book to be written. But we insisted that for history it had to. And why it was important is that one of my children, we had gone to the unveiling of the tombstone of the mastermind behind the Church Street bomb blast. And the name was Nkosinati Maseko from Mamelodi. So, you know, kuqalwe ekhaya, you have the service, the speeches, and then you go to the graveyard and then come back home. So as we're driving out to the graveyard, one of the boys says, "Eish, Malme Elias," they would call me Malume, even though I'm the younger. "Malme Elias, are you politicians?" I said, "No, we're not." And he says, "I don't understand." I said, "What do you mean you don't understand?" And he says, "But all the things they were talking about there are the things that we hear in the news about Uncle Trevor, that is Trevor Manuel, the former Minister of Finance, about Umkhulu Mandela and the like. So how can you not be politicians?" Then I said, no. We were supporting the politicians." And he says, "I still don't understand." The Umagogo entered the education, it still didn't work. That was the final straw for me that we needed to write. I said to myself, if our children know about Van Riebeeck and Vasco da Gama and John Forster, but they don't know about us, that's a fundamental indictment. It's a big problem. Then I decided to start writing. And I don't know, for some interesting reason, I decided to rush this project. And I don't know why I was rushing it. I finished from start to finish. It was within 12 months I finished writing the book. It took me longer to find a publisher than it was to write the book. We published the book in June of 2007. In September of 2007, Makoko passed on. She was healthy. She went through the road shows of doing the discussions and the talks of the books in Swaziland, in South Africa, all parts of South Africa. She was just healthy. And then one weekend we came home. In fact, we even have pictures, and I think it was premonition. Besphelele song. And we took pictures as a family. As soon as we got into South Africa, we get a call. Umakoko is not well. Okay, take her to the hospital. And that evening, it's getting worse. And that was it. She left. 3 months later. So, it says to me, whatever told me to speed up the book, because that thing knew what was coming.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it was. So Mfundisi, angikhulumi ngetangoma. It's a power that I cannot explain. So we've ended up with a phrase in the family, the power of 3. Later on, we published another book in 2018 when you published yours. And the title of the book is Larry, Simply Larry. This is about our high school headmaster, who had been in Swaziland from 1970 and had never left. And he had made it a point that he wants to die and be buried in Swaziland, because he believes his family is in Swaziland, no longer in Ireland. He was from Ireland. And one day I asked him, Fundis, why do you really want to be buried in Swaziland? And he says, you know, Elias, Ireland is very cold. It rains in summer, it freezes in winter. Can you imagine how much colder it is down there? I don't want to be there. So, Larry's book was published in September of 2018. And I had the good fortune of visiting where he came from and seeing his family and all. And he thought I was crazy going home to go and see what he thought was an old place that does not deserve visiting. After the publication of the book, he just decided to stop eating. In this day and age, he died of starvation. When I asked the priests what happened, and they say they think he had concluded that he had achieved what he was meant to do, and there was nothing more to live for. Now, part of the series of coincidences is that we fixed the publishing date of the book before we went to the publishers. And you know what can happen with publishers. They were delaying, there was errors and all sorts of things, and the day was getting closer. And then I decided I'm going to publish an electronic version as a stopgap measure. And the publishers were in Cape Town. As a stopgap measure, if I have an electronic book and I stand up to talk that I'm publishing a book, at least I can refer people to a website. Right? The day I was supposed to drive to Swaziland for the launch, the books had not arrived. When we call them, they cannot tell us where the truck is. So I said to Nonhlanhla, you know what? At 12 o'clock, whether the books are here or not, I'm jumping into the car and driving. Because the following day was the book launch. At 12 o'clock, I stood up, the bags were already in my car. I walked to the car, opened the door. As I was opening the door, somebody in the house says, there's a call from the gate. I didn't even think it was the books. I said, okay, attend to them. But oh, it's the books. When the truck arrived, it didn't even get into the yard. I said, stand there, take the books into the car. Straight into the car, we drove here. Now what I usually do when I arrive in Swaziland, I can enter the border at 6 p.m. I'll only get home at midnight because I'm visiting people. But on this particular day, I just did not have the edge to do that. I drove straight to Silesia. When I showed him the book, he giggled like a primary school kid. He just didn't want to talk to anyone, he just kept on paging through this book. And the phone rang at 6 o'clock. When the phone rang, he says to me, Elias, you answer the call. And I said, what is it about, Father? And he says, it's my birthday today. That's my sister. So apparently every year on his birthday, his sister would always call him. So I went to pick up the phone and I said, Larry is not ready to talk to you. And she says, why? And I said, he's looking at his book. And she understood. Put the phone down. Now, I didn't know that that was his birthday. That was another coincidence.
Yeah.
So he published, or he held his book on his day of birth, and he signed the following day. I think we signed over 1,000 copies on the day.
Sure.
Nobody wanted my signature. They wanted his signature. So even after that, people insisted they wanted his signature after he died. So I had to go and create a stamp of his signature. If somebody insists they want his signature, fuck his stamp. That's it. So this is part of the history extending beyond the lounge. But that tells you the amount of information that would be or offloaded in this lounge. If bekuneyibhoko bezizositshela ebusuku bekwenzakala. La kububamthweni khona, we had a book of memories on the day. When you go onto the website, you will see all the people who signed the book. Their pictures on the website. So, we'll move now from the lounge to the passage, which also has its own unique history, and the bedroom which was used as an armament house. And that's where the operatives spend most of their time when they are not in the lounge. We can go there. So we've characterized this as the nerve center of the house. We characterized it as the nerve center of the house. There used to be a telephone here, but it was this old telephone. When this phone rang, it was for two reasons. Either family is calling us from South Africa, or there is something that has gone badly wrong with an operation. One of the instances where this phone rang was when a very prominent operative who was called Viva Lolo was assassinated in Mbabane Escort. Those are old enough will remember that. And this happened right at the doorstep of my brother's house. They had come here, picked up a child who was loved by children. So picked up that child, they drove to Mbabane to Kwatot, our brother. They were going to proceed to a party. So bafika bashia lo mntwana kaTodd, and as they drove out from Todd's place, there was a drive-by shooting. There were 6 in the car, 3 died, 3 survived. The 3 ran back with bullet wounds and all. They ran back to Todd for assistance. So immediately Todd calls us and says, this has happened. We need a doctor. We had to call our in-country doctor, who was at that time, not that time, he was, who's the former Minister of Health? No, in South Africa, who had to resign from KZN. Mkhize, yes. Mkhize was our in-country doctor. So we had to call him, and he rushed to the place. And the car that did the drive-by shooting came back. When they checked, they said, no, there are 3 bodies here. Where are the other 3? And they concluded they must be Todd. They drove back to Todd. But the armed people didn't go in. They sent somebody, a very close family friend, a woman. And they said, Ham your kokot and verify if they're in there. Knocks, Todd opens the door, sees her and says, go away, I don't even want to talk to you. Close the door. She turned around. We think she went back to those people and said, I couldn't go in, so I don't know if they are there. Now, for us, the biggest fear was that had they gone in, it was going to be a bloodbath. Because by the time they came back, there were about 12 armed people in the house. So it would have been a disaster. So we're glad and grateful that she was never allowed into the house. So this becomes the nerve center of the house. And then the door behind Umamfundis is where the operatives operated from. Everything happened in this house, or in this room. And there's a wardrobe, normal wardrobe, but that was our armament. All the arms were stored in there. But there was a rule they could not be here for more than 2 nights. The preference was 1 night, and they move on. But from time to time, they would forget things, like detonators, grenade here, you know. And one day the police came to raid, and they found a grenade, and I was arrested for that. Yes. And the door right in front of you, that is Magogo's bedroom and Umkulu's bedroom. So we'll go outside and see the rest of the points outside. This tree has its own history. South Africa is doing what they call the liberation route. And as part of the liberation route, the mango tree is part of it. Leses Ngapa is the child to that one. So the tree has many stories to tell. But the 3 stories that I know is that it was used by the operatives to hide from the police when they came to raid. It was also used by the police to hide so as to ambush the operatives. Right? And thirdly, it was used by relatives. They coincided with one of the instances where we were raided and frog marched to the Manzini police station. And I think we spent a night there. That is the family and all the tenants into the cells. They arrived that night just to visit. They get here, they knock, they go to the back, nobody is answering. They had nowhere else to go. So they decided to park under the tree. And as they were sleeping at night, they hear movements in the tree. And they ask themselves, what is happening? So when they look up, armed police are sitting in the tree. And instead of being afraid, they said, no, now that we're safe, we can sleep peacefully. They slept, the following morning they drove away. But by the time they woke up the following morning, the police were gone. So those are the stories that we know about the tree. There may be many more that we do not know. And then the last story that I want to tell you is the one where we started. So the other thing that the liberation process teaches you is that there's an industry within, or there are industries within the liberation process. And part of those industries is the motor car industry. To move from point A to point B, you need a motor car. But the movement may not afford the cars that they need. So what do? They would steal the cars. They would go into South Africa, steal cars, bring them here. They become operational vehicles in Swaziland. There's a guy whose job was doing nothing but to go and steal cars. His name was General. Actually, it's not his title. He's not a general, but he was called General. The car that was used for the Pretoria Church Street bomb blast was parked where the trailer is parked for about 3 months to cool it off. So when you immediately steal it, we say iyashisa, it's too hot. You can't drive around in it. Let it cool off, let the police stop searching for it, and then you can start driving in it. So it was parked here. When it was picked up, before the guys left, was parked here, facing down. And the Church Street bomb blast was the only operation which, when we sent it off, we cried. We cried for 2 reasons. One, because we knew it was a suicide mission. They were not going to come back. It was a write-off from day one. Secondly, one of the people involved was a relative. So when the car started moving. All the people who were there just burst out in tears. All the other operations were normal, but this one was just special. It then becomes even more special. We know who Colleen was. Colleen, the one organizes this event.
Yeah.
Colleen, for some interesting reason, decides, I no longer like these photographers and videographers. I want to change them. And I said, okay, fine, you can change them. She changes them. She tells me the week before we travel down here who the new photographers and videographers are. When I look at the list, because we're setting up a meeting to brief them, when I look at the list, all these people are Afrikaner. There's not a single black person there. Ngithi, Colleen, what did you do here? And she says, what? And I said, all these people are Afrikaner. Only then did it strike a bell in her mind. She said, you know, Elias, I didn't think about it. Can I change them? I said, no, don't worry. Don't change them. We'll brief them properly. Now, we did not have the chance to brief them in South Africa. We only got to brief them when we got here. So I asked them, guys, do you know what you're here for? They said, no, we're going to cover an event. I said, well, it's more than an event. And I need to understand if you will manage, you will be comfortable covering this event. They said, well, we do not know, after I told them what the event is about. The only question they asked me was, will there be white people in there? I said, of course, there will be white people. But they have a particular mindset. They said, okay, that's fine. So we came. And when we were doing this, there was a car here, incidentally. So I was leaning, it was facing, I was leaning on the car like this, and the people were standing here. And as I was talking about the operation, I could observe that the people are no longer looking at me as you are looking at me. They are looking at my side. So one of them who was taking the stills pictures stopped taking and stood next to me. When I turned to look at him, the guy is all red. So I'm asking him, are you fine? He says, I don't think so. And I said, what is wrong? And he says, the operation that you're talking about affected me. So I had to pause. And I said, okay, for the benefit of everyone, can you tell us what happened? And he says, for some interesting reason, on that day, he had to post a letter to his father. He was in the army, or was in the military. So he told his friends they would go to lunch together every day. So he told his friends that, guys, I will leave early because I want to post a letter. Let's meet at the restaurant. And then he left. As he was crossing the road, the bomb went off. And he says he was hospitalized for over 6 months. So to him, when I was telling the story, it was as clear as if it was happening. So that year, we were doing, the theme for the year was celebrating widows of the struggle. So it brought all Abu Mama from South Africa who are widows of the struggle to come and celebrate with them. I think we had 12 widows or so. And that year, the speeches on the Saturday night, I think, ended up at 1 a.m. This is when we were telling Abu Mama Ubuti, you'll have to do a speech when you receive the award. And all of them were saying, no, we can't speak. We're shy to talk in front of people. And then we said, even if you can say thank you, but you cannot say nothing. What was interesting, when you listen to the speeches, on average, they were 30 to 40 minutes each. So I then turn to this guy and I say, I don't know what to do for you. but can I offer you something? And he says, yes, without even asking what it's going to be. And I said, do you want to meet the wife of the person who died on the operation? And the guy says, yes, I would like to meet her. Unfortunately, she wasn't with us here. Wasala e hotel. So the evening, when you go back to the hotel, I call Umama Seko, Mama Bagama Seko. I call Mama Seko and I say, Mama Seko, somebody wants to meet you. So she comes down to reception and I introduce them. I'd never seen something like this. You know, without being told, they both stood up, walked to the other person, and they just embraced as if they are siblings who have never seen each other for a long time. I realized that I no longer belong here. I just left them. I don't know what happened after that. So there are many such stories after Number 43, which are drawing from experiences of people who are not written about in the book. That's the end of the tour. Any questions?
Can you please share with us the story of how King Sopuza helped some operatives that were being hunted by the police, how he accepted them into the royal palace? His Majesty King Sopuza II.
Yeah, so those who do not know, King Sopuza is the father to the current king. He was seen as one of the wisest political leaders on the African continent. He had to balance between the ANC on the one side and the apartheid government on the other. Of course, not forgetting the people of Swaziland. He always said the liberation of South Africa is the liberation of the whole continent. In fact, the mother to King Sopuza was the first funders of MK. The donation that she made was actually utilized to set up Radio Freedom in Ethiopia. So that's how close the royal family has always been to the African National Congress. But amongst the operations that were held, so how we did an operation, just to give you an insight, if they were going to drive in the Oshuk direction or even in the Mozambican direction, there'll be two cars that will do a reconnaissance. One will leave here at home and do the route all the way to the border. At the same time, there'll be another one leaving the border, taking the opposite direction, coming here. When the one that arrives here says it's clear, the guys pack their bags into the car and they go. Because you don't want to delay. If the route is clear, you utilize it. So there was going to be an operation in, I think it was a Sasol operation, or it was a Fort Trekker monument operation. I can't remember what it was. We had done that reconnaissance. We knew that they needed to leave at midday. The car arrived here, it said, coast clear, move. They jumped into the car. When they get to Lobamba, a mother of roadblocks has been set up. Shocking to everyone how it happened. So the guys stopped abruptly. They looked around, what do we do? And the security van started approaching them. They did a U-turn. They couldn't do a U-turn and come back here. They couldn't do a U-turn and try to go to the Maputo border. They would never reach. So they did a U-turn and drove into the King's Crawl. Parked the car and stepped out the car and walked into the crawl. Now, if you are in the crawl, you are on king's property, you cannot be arrested. So all that happened, the sirens and the cars all stood in front of the court with their noise. And it turns out that the king was there on that day. And he asked, what is happening outside? And he was told, no, there are terrorists outside. And he said, so how do you know that they are terrorists? And they said, no, Bapetsetipa. Have you seen these guns? No, we haven't seen them. And he said, so what is the problem? Leave these people to go wherever they want to go. And that was the wisdom of King Sopusa. And a few months later, he tells a story at Somhlolo Stadium when he's addressing the nation. Now, when he told the story, only us knew what he was talking about. I think the rest of Swaziland never understood. Right? Sometimes when I tell this story, people say, oh, we remember what he said, but we didn't understand what he was talking about. So he says at the stadium, Maswati, umuntu umakafika kakho acela emandi muphe emandi andlule ahambe umakafika acela indzawo yekulala mnike indzawo yekulala umuphe kudla umakavuka ekseni umyekele ahambe angathi umasekalele bese uvula emgodlweni wakhe ufuna kubuka ukuthi kunani la ngekhathi uma uthola kunetinhloko tebantu utawendani become an accomplice. And all that he was saying was, leave the ANC operate. If you haven't seen what they are doing, they are not your problem. And when the apartheid regime would question him, that these people come from Mozambique and they cross through your country and go and bomb places in Johannesburg, why don't you stop them here? His response was, they travel a longer distance in South Africa. You should be able to pick them up much easier than we do. So if you cannot pick them up, how do you expect us to pick them up? And that was his defense all the time. So to answer your question, he always was profound in whatever he did and whatever he said. I never experienced him directly, but we've always had these indirect experiences with him.
Hayi, no phakathi.
By
Sophuza kwazinje masibekela mkukhuthano wezimpondo zimilile nje ngabe inkomenze sabanshaka. Wena nkungu emnyama embethe umdimba kube ngombatha mina mfokozana bekungaze kusolo ngithuthumela. Wongabe yaka enhlungu ziyababazi yashuqula. Hamba yedwa lo njengelanga, hamba yedwa lo njengomlahlekile. Lo mdzingo wedwa onophakathi bayethe no phakathi
wena waphakathi
mdzingo wedwa ndabona amandla uyimele iAfrika.
hlala ningekuthula omasilela hlala ningeluxolo omasilela siyadinga ukuthi ulahlekelwa ubuhlungu kodwa impilo tethu asikadiphatheli siphathelwe umniyowa ongekunesikhathi sabo nesikhathi sabo Grace usishile angel akasekho Granny wasishiya naye thodi ubuhlungu basishiya ngasikashana nesincane ungekunesikhathi sakho sikhatsi sekujabula sikhatsi sekutfokoza sikhatsi sacincobola sikhatsi sekukhala sikhatsi sekulila sikhatsi sebuhlungu uNkulunkulu uyathi oh yeah uNkulunkulu uyathi yeah uNkulunkulu uyathi uyandibona yeah mama
Oh, Masilela, no Masilela, written in the eyes and the skies tells of your gracious minds. Conquer cave heart, compassion of a little child. It spread like wildfire, reaching borders of 100 miles. Angels fly high, the rising of the sun. Spirit like wildfire, burning through the pages of time.
For every death that we observe, a big part of our history is lost forever, never to be recovered.
silela noma sin.
Nilbitan lilichil pasta. No, the whole thing is a tombstone. That is the headstone, and then this is something in El Kamalai. What's an epitaph? I see. So you call this an epitaph. Okay. So the epitaph is the book open.
You're quite intentional about everything around this tombstone, which is good. Everything culminates to this.
But the interesting thing is that the one who passed on first has had the biggest space. Because the house is not really symmetrical. It's bigger this size than that side.
She was
But-
the matriarch.
The real one. Okay, we are here. I'll hand over to you.
Lilala kahle ikholwa elethembayo impela livuka ngokujabula libonga inkosi uyise lilala kahle ikholwa elethembayo utela livuka ngokujabula libonga inkosi uyise.
Egameni ngeleyise lentodzana lelamoya longcwele asikhuleke. uNkulunkulu wethu onamandla, wena uNkulunkulu esithembele kuwe. Lo ukhona babe umhlaba ungakasekelwa. uNkulunkulu namhlanje babe sivakashele babe nanga emachawe babe lakusebentele asaphila emhlabeni. uNkulunkulu wami longcwele liva ngelakho baliphila ekulukhuluma baphenze baliphila ngekwenda. uNkulunkulu wethu longcwele siyakubonga abalale ngekuthula abaqhubeke babe balale ngekuthula. Namhlanje babe siyakubonga sibonga umsebenzi yabo. uNkulunkulu abawuqalile emhlabeni lela bawendlusela kubantwana babo. Siyabonga ke babethu longcwele lokuthi uNkulunkulu babo ethembekile. Ngetikhathi tonke simakathe uthi uma usuqalile umsebenzi wena uNkulunkulu uyawufeza. Ngoba wawuqala lo msebenzi simakathe solo uphethwe nguwe uNkulunkulu holwa sandla sakho. And lokuholwa sandla sakho uNkulunkulu akuvinjwa lutho. Ude kumoya babe uyawuvimba lokho uNkulunkulu oqalile. Qhubeka simakathe sandla sakho sibe setukwako. Nalabantu ababo babe labasele baqhaqhuba lo msebenzi loshwa nglabantu abadzala. uNkulunkulu sesababeka la kulenzawo balinzele lilanga lekukhala kweliqhilo. Siyathandaza ke babothu longcwele sithi mamhla sitobonga sitohalalisa lokhu lebaqala. Qhubeka ke simakathe wena uNkulunkulu onemandla ube nathi ngaso sonke isikhathi usivikele lenhlitiyo lebebanayo ichubeke nakithi. Nangasilibandla lemaluthela la emhlabeni wonke jikelele. Babe leyo nhlitiyo umuntu ngamunye ngamunye abenayo. Yekunakekela umuntu. Siyabonga ke lo mdzala wethu isuku ngoba siyakwethemba uNkulunkulu ukuthi wena Jehova wethu wethembekile ngaso sonke isikhathi. Utheke babe nasikhuleka bese sesithi ke. Babe wethu wasezulwini. Mangcweliswe igama lakho. Umso wakho mawude. Inthando yakho mayendiwe emhlabeni njengasezulwini. Usiphe isinkwa sethu semihla ngemihla. Usithethelele macala ethu. Njengoba nathi sibathethelela labo labasonayo. Ungasingenise kulingweni kodwa usinzise kulokubi. Ngoba umbuso wakho nemandla lebukhosi kude kwenini. Amen.
Ngimukelani isibusiso. Umusa inkosi yethu Jesu Kristu luthando nekuhlanyela kamoya ingcwele makube nathi. Nkosi ayibusise egameni leyise nelendvosana nelemoya ingcwele. Amen.
Amen.
What we'll ask for is just to take a group photo. If we can stand on the other side, take a group photo, and then we can Are you seeing everybody?
Yes.
No.